Hello and welcome to the Microsoft Megabyte for January 27th, 2022. I have a fantastic guest today who I'm really looking forward to learning a great deal from, Solomon Romney. Now, Solomon is the Accessibility Program Manager at Microsoft, so you can probably see why I'm excited that he's made the foolish errand of giving us his free time today. But before we get to that, the scope of what accessibility means, I think, has really widened and drawn increased attention in recent years, especially in the tech industry. So I am really excited to dive in and understand what accessibility means from the larger perspective from all of us who represent or are just merely fans of Microsoft. Solomon, thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Brian, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about accessibility. So I mean, now I get to do it all day, every day. So that's it's great.
Isn't it great when your passions become your job, and then the struggle to keep it your passion is right there?
Yeah, it's when your hobby becomes your job, and then you don't have a hobby anymore. Yeah, I agree. And that is the trick. It's like, how do I stay passionate about it? And it actually, Microsoft makes that pretty easy with all of the stuff we get to do. So.
Hey, whoa! Don't bury the lead. I'm gonna get to all that stuff. So, okay, I think. This is you and I have been talking off mic for a while here. We have similar backgrounds, performance backgrounds, and are interested in the same boring philosophical type stuff. So then, with that said, pardon the cliche, I feel like I'm in a safe space with you to ask this question or to make this build this context. I think a lot of people still struggle with terms like accessibility or disability or inclusivity. It's one of those fields where you feel too embarrassed to admit to any ignorance, so you don't want to even engage. I would love to talk with you about what the heck is accessibility. Why do you have your job? Why is your role important? Why does it matter today, perhaps more than it might have 10 years ago? I would love to hear what your take is on that. But first, hi, Solomon. What is accessibility?
Accessibility is about making equitable outcomes for people with disabilities. That's probably the nutshelliest I can get about it.
Okay.
And that could mean access to information, access to mass transit, to financial opportunities, to jobs, to gaming, to how they interact with a computer. It's any space where there's a barrier between an individual with a disability and an objective. So to get a little higher level about it, we work off of what's called the social model of disability, and this might help frame this a little bit as well. Traditionally, disability was about the individual, and that's how it's always been viewed. And thankfully, this has changed, a lot in my lifetime. But this idea that it was somehow a flaw or a failing on the part of that individual, and the World Health Organization a bit ago actually shifted the definition of disability to being a mismatch between a person and their environment. And that really, I think, shifts the conversation a bit, where, classic example that we come to is, and this is personal to me as a gamer with only one hand, for example. Traditionally, the Xbox controllers, greatest controllers in the market, like objectively considered the finest piece of hardware for gaming.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm biased. But if someone like me can't use that controller, can't access all of those buttons, I'm not the disability. The controller is the disability.
Right.
And so, and what you've brought up, Brian, are a lot of what, really big, potentially scary concepts: disability, diversity, inclusion, accessibility. What words do I even use?
Offense, the whole area of offense too.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's sort of two sides to offense. How do I not offend people? And where am I allowed to be offended on behalf of someone? And that's
Right.
a whole other idea. But yeah, that's just the language of talking about disability and accessibility. It is a huge barrier for people to even get into the conversation, like you're saying. Without knowing the words, the language to use, people are deeply afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And for someone who works in accessibility all the time, as a person with a disability, has dealt with this my entire life, I'm gonna clue you in. You're going to say the wrong thing. I say the wrong thing.
Right.
Because it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of language.
And it's not static.
No, exactly. Like I can't tell you how, just in my lifetime, how many different ways there have been to describe disability, even just my own
Yeah.
existence. And it's, we've gone through the whole, the really awful, and to make me cringe just to say them, but like crippled to handicapped, which are really very,
And worse. It
oh,
depends. However
well,
long, how many decades you want to go
yeah,
back,
how
it
far
gets
back
worse.
you want to go.
Yeah.
Medieval demonic possession. Like,
Yes.
I mean, but I think back to when, even being a left-handed person was considered, and so, extrapolate that out to people with disabilities. And
This is such a stretch, but you bring to mind the notion, the surprising notion that is always shocking to re-encounter, that reading inside your head silently was once a demonic possession, a sign of
right.
demonic possession, and almost a disability in and of itself, to think, what is that person doing over there reading? Because everyone, when texts first became popularized, it was something you read aloud. You read aloud to
Hmm.
groups, and you'd recite the things that you'd scribed down. And
Yeah.
once some individuals would play around with reading and realize they could do it without muttering at the
Without
same
speaking.
time,
Yeah.
and now they are an other in that moment.
Hmm.
And now,
Yeah.
of course, we
And
look at that as perhaps a more efficient way to get things done.
yeah, we prefer it. That's what
Yeah,
we teach kids in school,
right.
sustained silent reading. Man, I loved SSR. Also my initials, so maybe that was a clue.
Wow, kismet.
You're right. But no, I think, and I think to sort of bring this home a little bit more is there are people alive where that was still the norm
For sure.
in their life. That was still the norm when I was born, a child of the early 80s. Like,
Your ability spectrum was only remarked on in terms of its negativity.
oh, absolutely. And it's funny because I have another limb different colleague in Microsoft, and she and I talk all the time, and she's about 12 years younger than me. And just that gap of time, being on one side of the American with Disabilities Act and being on the other, made a humongous difference in how people approach, talk about, think about, because when I was a kid, that was always the first thing attacked. For her, that was sacrosanct. That was protected. No
Right.
one said anything negative about
Right.
that. And if anyone ever did, they were shunned. They became a pariah. And it was such a shift. And I don't know that people understand how recent that still is. So yeah, when we talk about the language of this shifting and changing, it is actively being developed. And we go back and forth. Like every week we are having these discussions about what is the right term and are we using this in a way that makes sense. And just to complicate things, every person with a disability may refer to themselves differently.
Sure.
And that's absolutely right for them. And so, words that in some contexts would be absolutely acceptable, blind and deaf,
Yeah.
which are words that for a large portion of those populations are owned, that's their culture, that's an identifier. For others, it can be very off putting.
All of this is so meaningful from just a humanitarian perspective. All these changes, just a reflection of the decades of progress and the troubles and turmoils within those decades. But now you are here with a Microsoft logo on your shirt. Okay, you have a job. You work in the tech industry, and the decisions that these tech giants make, like Microsoft, have such an impact. I mean, I talked to Edie Adams about ergonomics, and you're just talking about like what a tiny shift in how a mouse fits in a hand or something, and how you're affecting hundreds of millions of people overnight potentially, and it's just enormous. So how do you bring these sensitive, thoughtful, complex notions to a corporate environment, one that is so widely known and widely used by billions of people? How do you reconcile this?
It's tough.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning into the Megabyte podcast.
It's tough. Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I'll tell you, Brian, when I started my journey with accessibility with Microsoft 5 years ago, what I am doing now and the kind of work that we're doing and the job listings that are available for accessibility have transformed. Like these were none of this sort of, at least internal to Microsoft, this was still very much a niche, do it as part-time, do it on your, as a side or on your personal time sort
It's
of
a
deal.
nice to have, but not a need to have.
Yeah, I'll credit Satya for making, for really pushing a lot of that culture change. It's always easy when you have leaders that have a personal connection to disability to drive those kind of initiatives. And he's been a real great champion of that for us. But it takes time for that to trickle down the rest of the way through the organization. And we are a massive corporation. We change slowly.
Yeah.
So where we were 5 years ago to where we are now, it's been a huge shift. So to get back to your question, how do you bring all this in? You bring in people with disabilities. The key to this, and there have been missteps. There people designing for people with disabilities.
Okay.
Instead of with them.
Okay, sure.
And that's a huge, huge distinction. And
I mean, no offense by this, but the analogy that comes to mind is committees designing toys for children without ever having consulted what do children even play with anymore, right? Imagining what it must be like to be someone of a different perspective, and just going ahead and assuming that you know how to design for them.
Well, yeah, this is going to be a throwback reference, but the Tom Hanks movie Big.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what he's dealing with there as a kid who gets turned into an adult and goes to work for this toy company.
You guys don't know what you're talking
nothing about what kid. Yeah, I mean, it's very much a know your audience. But even those of us who are experts in, subject matter experts in the field, even if we were to sit down and design something for people with disabilities, that would absolutely be wrong and we would mess it up.
Yeah.
The only way we do this authentically and correctly is by bringing in the different disability communities early and often to provide meaningful feedback and input through the entire design and production process. That is how you create products that absolutely delight people, like the Xbox Adaptive Controller or the new Surface Adaptive Kit. Is we worked on those projects hand in hand from the beginning with our disability community partners, and not just one group. We tried to get as broad a selection of people across types of disabilities to make sure that we were addressing as many of the needs as possible. We have a phrase we like to use a lot, which is that users with disabilities are also power users.
Right, of course.
Because they need the same kind of tools. They need the same customization that power users get to have. So in the business world, they're like, oh, all these things that are great and efficient and make, job productivity better. And we're like, yeah, but also life improving and also still productive for people with disabilities, potentially more so than your general use case.
Yeah, the thing needs to work at the end of the day also. It can't just fit. It has to also help do something.
Well, and now we're looking at how do we get beyond just being functional?
Yeah.
Like, we can make a lot of things that work, but are we making them delightful? Are we making them comfortable and welcoming to people with disabilities? The needs of individuals with disabilities are racing well beyond what the requirements are by law. And so we need to be responsive to that. And we are working, and this is again where you bring the disability community and it makes it a lot easier to pivot, especially if it's early in the process when we're still in design and ideation, to actually ask someone what they need.
Well, I wanted to see if I could put you on the spot and I know our audience would love to hear some insights about perhaps a product development, whether it may be the Xbox controller, for example, and the kind of questions that were asked along the way, the kinds of decisions, or perhaps even healthy arguments that were had along the way that led to an outcome of something that you're ultimately pleased with.
Yeah, because it's top of mind and it's fresh. Let's talk about the Surface Adaptive Kit.
Oh, great. Yeah.
A lot of the accessibility focused products that we make go through the hackathon process. And then we also do things, we do inclusive design sprints where we actually get together, we bring in members of the disability community, they talk to our engineers, our designers. We go through this whole interview process, panel discussions, and then we look at all of the mismatches we've identified and go to synthesize, how would we solve this? in the if money is no object, if resources are not a problem, what
Yeah.
is the perfect
Yeah.
solution?
What would be platinum? What would be the platinum level
Exactly.
here?
And we did that with the Surface Adaptive Kit. It came out of a hack project. It went through an inclusive design process, but every step along the way, we had people with disabilities testing it, and we got some interesting feedback, because we had these ideas, and there are a lot of people on our design teams that have disabilities of varying types that are doing these projects because they or someone they know would benefit from them. And it's, like I said, it's always nice when someone has that personal connection. But there were assumptions that even we had made, ideas that we had put forth that we thought through the design sprint and and from the hackathon to the design sprint, where we really thought this was a good idea. And we got feedback from the community that was like, this doesn't work for us. So as we're going back and sort of reviewing all of the work that we did on that, all of the testing we did with the community, all the feedback, and going, okay, how would we make this better? Where did we potentially miss a mark? Where did we try to serve a particular group and fell down? Because that's a big part too, is trying to define who these products are designed for, which disabilities we're trying to serve, and really focusing on that target group so that we can really dive deep into those needs. A lot of it also has to do with how we tell the stories of these products. How do we talk about accessible products? How do we talk about people with disabilities? How do we walk the line between actually showing authentic and empowering experiences with people with disabilities and creating inspiration porn?
Yeah.
It's like, look at these people and what they've
Yes.
overcome, and
Look how
aren't they
great
so
we are.
inspiring? Yeah, exactly.
How do you gain the respect of communities, really?
Well, and they hate that community. Like, as a member of the disability community, I hate that. There's a different way we have to think about accessibility, because they love those inspirational messages, and they're great with things like our main product lines, like really showing people the power of what we can do, and the swelling music and that really inspirational message, which resonates with a lot of our people. But if we use that same tactic, if we take that same approach to accessibility focused products, it will have a completely inverse effect. The communities will hate it, and we will hear about it.
Yeah.
And they are very vocal communities, which we like because we get a lot of feedback. And so it's really representation becomes very important as well. And like with any other diversity and inclusive enterprise, we have to make sure that in our marketing, in our materials, we're adequately representing the spectrum of disability, so that we're not over-indexing on a single type of disability, that we are representing fairly the diversity in that community. We can make an accessible product, but if we put it in an inaccessible box, we failed. We have absolutely failed our customers there. It does not matter how good a product is if they can't get it out of the box.
It's one of those changes that really affects everybody, regardless of ability. I have noticed how much better, more impressive packaging has gotten with everything. And I'm noticing that my kids are able to unbox and enjoy things in a way that I know I wasn't able. I'd need to find an adult with a Swiss Army knife. I just think it's worth noting that these are things that have broad-reaching effects, positive effects to humanity writ large sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. That's what we have 3 inclusive design principles, and that is the third one, which I consider to be the most important one, which is design for one and extend to many. And that's where we talk about designing from the margins in and things like that, is if we can take these really extreme use cases and we can design for that, and we can provide customers with a solution for that extreme use case, it is absolutely going to benefit everyone else in the market. It's like with the Surface Adaptive Kit, we designed the bump labels and the tactile indicators to be very colorful and easy to spot for people with low vision or limited vision. But we're finding that even people who don't have that condition or don't have a mobility disability like the rest of the kit is for are still benefiting from having them because it makes it easier for them to locate particular keys or ports on their
Absolutely.
device, which is entirely the idea. I mean, we even have people who are putting the adaptive kit on things like their microwave
Oh, for
or
sure.
other appliances, because what we're finding is that what works on a computer just works because
Yeah.
it's about human interaction. And what we've done is made the interaction easier on a computer that also can now be an easier interaction on other appliances, on other things around someone's life. And that's where I think we make our strongest play. You're absolutely right, Brian.
Yeah.
If it works for, if a curb cut was created for a person in a wheelchair, how many people do you know that push strollers
Exactly right.
or pull luggage or
Or
ride
use it. Yep.
bicycles?
Yep.
Yeah, that benefit from that. And that's I don't know anyone these days who doesn't watch things with captions on.
Right. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's become the norm.
Yeah.
Even sitting in my living room with my sound bar on, I still have those captions on because it just helps. We have to design from an accessible standpoint. It has to be baked in from the beginning rather than bolted on at the end.
Did you just? I'm sorry. I have to come
Yeah.
clean with the audience here. Did you just think you could get away with throwing a Windows Phone 7 marketing line at me and think that did you think it's my first rodeo?
Do you know who I am?
Built in, not bolted on is one of my
Yeah.
favorite terms. And you're right. It has a holistic reality to this topic right here. I think afterthought design, especially with accessibility needs, is inherently offensive.
Well, and it's just bad business. Like it wastes resources. It never works as well as it would have if you put it in the first place. But it's funny you bring up Windows Phone 7. That was actually in a lot of ways the sort of impetus for Microsoft to shift culture and how it thought about accessibility.
Oh, interesting.
During one of the updates, essentially, we removed all of the features that made the phone usable to blind and low vision users. So we essentially bricked their Windows Phone. And the American Council for the Blind wrote some very public, very forcefully worded letters about it. And that was about 7 years ago, I want to say 7 or 8 years now. And they made a very impassioned case, and we listened, and we went, you know what? We didn't do this right.
Yeah, fair play,
And
fair dues.
yeah, good call. And we're going to be better about it going forward. And that really, I think, it was an eye-opening moment for Microsoft to sort of go, oh, wait a minute, we need to be more aware of how our decisions are affecting various parts of our community, of our user base.
If you put yourself in the shoes of a retail pro, perhaps, whether in store or virtually, they're helping customers, helping users navigate some options. What would you say might be in their best interests? What kind of features or further learnings, or when you think about the broader Microsoft ecosystem in store level, Xbox, Microsoft 365, Surface, Windows, what might be some strong points? If you were training a new hire who's going to be talking to customers about all these products and stuff, what would be some things like, just so you know, these are some major accessibility areas that you might want to familiarize yourself with? Go ahead.
You're taking me back to my stores days.
Yes, I thought I'd give you some nice, lovely PTSD there.
Taking me back to my Microsoft Store days when I was onboarding and training people.
Yeah.
And we were having these conversations. And this was in the early days of this really becoming a thing. And so, the advice I would give, or the advice I did give, and I still believe in it, is number one, ask questions. And I know that is also the top of the sales training guidelines. Ask questions. When it comes to accessibility, if you are uncomfortable with terms and you don't know how to refer to something, going back to our language discussion, ask the person. Ask them what their preferred terms are, how they want you to talk about it, and then respect their answer. Number one. Number two, ask them where things don't work. Where are their pain points? What do they struggle to do? And here, and a little, extra context on that. People with disabilities are used to adapting to an environment. And so we have found, anecdotally, but there's enough of this to suggest that it's true, that people with disabilities, because they are so used to having to adapt, don't tend to ask or think about going beyond functional.
Yeah.
Because they're just so used to
that's possible, even. Yeah.
Right, because they're just so used to having to do it themselves. And so if you really want to start to dig into someone's accessibility needs, you need to ask them where those friction points are. What is something you wish you could do that you can't? What is something you wish your computing experience could do that would make it more comfortable, easier for you, more delightful?
Because your answer might lead me to an immersive reader demo. Your answer might lead me to a voice to text demo. Your answer might lead me to the adaptive kit. And oh my gosh, let's just talk selfishly from a sales perspective for a moment. That's a rarefied moment when you can tailor an experience so uniquely to the needs, the genuine needs, and to surprise and delight beyond what was expected. Honestly, that's an excellent day to come home after.
Yes. And I, just to sort of hammer this home a little more, genuinely listen. Don't just be listening for buzzwords or keywords where you're like, oh, they need this product.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in sales reps, back in the day, where they would listen a little bit to what someone was saying. They wouldn't ask a lot of questions, and they would immediately jump to a solution that ultimately was wrong, and then we'd end up spending hours, and the customer would leave. And it's have a genuine curiosity when you are asking these questions about their needs, and then make the effort, take the effort to really listen to those responses, because they may say things that will reference the stuff, that you can sort of put on the side that is going to help shape your journey with them, that they may not even realize they need or that they're asking for. If you can treat people like that, and you should treat everybody that way, but since we're talking about accessibility, if you treat users with disabilities that way, they're going to remember that. And they're going to tell people that. And they're going to come see you, and their friends and family are going to come and see you. So from just even a nuts and bolts like sales pipeline type of deal, if you can show that you genuinely care and that you want to affect these people's lives in positive ways, that will have impact on your sales. And as Brian said, you will go home happy at the end of the day. Like, it is really fulfilling. Maybe one final thought here is, what may seem very small and simple to you can be absolutely life-changing for someone with a disability. Because a lot of people, I'm sure, look at the Surface Adaptive Kit and go, oh, it's just a bunch of stickers. But for someone like me, who struggles to open kickstands or laptops because I don't have a fine pointer device on my left hand to do that, being able to attach a lanyard or a D-ring makes a huge change for me. And it's a lot of times it really is those little simple changes. You don't need to reinvent someone's entire technology experience, their entire way of doing things. In fact, you shouldn't, because learning curves and stuff like that are massive.
Yeah.
But if you can make small, meaningful changes for them, that's actually going to have the biggest impact that you can make. About 5 years ago, I had a brief stint heading up accessibility for Microsoft's physical stores. I went to them one day and I said, hey, I need to see the full list of Microsoft accessibility features so I know what to train people on. And they said, well, that doesn't exist. That's not a thing. And I said, well, then how do we know what we have? Yeah, it was crickets. And, I went to the Office team. I went to the Windows team. Nobody had lists. There wasn't none of that. So I sat down with with my colleagues in Sela, and we went, okay, we're going to make something. We're going to build a database. And we spent weeks figuring out what those options were, doing our best as accessibility experts to capture everything and get it on that list. And then about 6 months later, the accessibility features website showed up, which is aka.ms/accessibility features. And this has been around now for almost 5 years, I want to say.
And is this a public?
Um,
Is this a
it
publicly
is public.
accessible
It's
website?
absolutely open and public. Yes, 100%. And obviously I have a personal connection to it, but I still believe that it is one of the most powerful tools we have, because what it does is it takes every feature that we have been able to figure out. And again, it's still just our best guess. Like, I'm sure there's stuff out there that we're missing, things that we create that we don't know have an accessibility story. But it is the most comprehensive list available that we can make. And as far as I know, it's one of the only of its kind in the world. And it's updated regularly, at least every quarter, with new features and new updates. And essentially, it breaks all of the features out by disability group, even if you don't necessarily have those products set up in your environment. And I would be surprised if there are eye gaze bars, to be perfectly honest. You can still go to this website and you can pull up the eye gaze section and show people what that looks like, what eye control looks like on Windows, because it may be a technology they've never seen before.
Absolutely.
And so it really is, I think, it's really a very important part of our accessibility strategy all up, to be able to provide that kind of resource publicly and keep it updated. And so, yeah, absolutely would urge anyone to go and look at it. It's an encyclopedic review of accessibility at Microsoft from a product standpoint.
And one more time, it's aka.ms/accessibility features.
Correct.
Okay, awesome.
It redirects somewhere else, but that's the link you need.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Solomon, I have kept you, I think, quite literally twice as long as I promised to. So is there anything else that you would be remiss if you didn't feel like you mentioned to a consumer facing audience?
Yeah. Don't be intimidated by it. Don't be afraid of it. You don't have to know all of it all at once. Start small. Pick one thing and start there. Learn one feature. Deep dive into one product. Don't feel like you have to have every solution from go, because you're not. We don't have all those solutions. We certainly don't expect you to, and certainly not in a bite-sized chunk that you can give to a consumer. So pick one. So yeah, if you do that, I think you're going to have a better shot at being successful at this, as if you take it by pieces. And slowly over time, you'll accumulate that knowledge and that confidence about the topic to be able to really have meaningful conversations with folks.
Very well put. Well put. I love the call to action of don't be afraid of this. Dive right in. There's only good stuff can happen as you start learning more and more about accessibility.
That's right.
Solomon Romney, Accessibility Program Manager at Microsoft. Genuinely, we are very grateful for your time, and because, among all the other reasons, you are an audio editor's dream. You have no filler words. Your theater background is clearly serving you well. Excellent plosive control, which will be very helpful for me in the editing bay. So you'll be back soon, Solomon.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Yeah, happy to, anytime.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thanks, Brian.
This has been the Microsoft Megabyte Podcast, a training tool for Microsoft field team members and sales professionals across the country, produced by Microsoft employees.